On this special episode of Talking Politics, Trump's talks in Turnberry with the Prime Minister.
Let me welcome you, Mr. President, to Scotland.
I like this man a lot.
Two leaders with two very different styles.
I do think that when he is with Trump, he does somehow seem a little bit more relaxed, or at least he picks up on the vibe.
To the wide-ranging substance of it, Russia, Gaza, Epstein and windmills. On a ceasefire in Russia.
I'm going to make a new deadline of about 10 or 12 days from today. There's no reason in waiting.
On the devastating situation in Gaza.
I think both of us know that we have to get to that ceasefire.
We have to help on a humanitarian basis before we do anything. We have to get the kids fed.
On his defense over Epstein.
I haven't been overly interested in it. It's a hoax that's been built up way beyond proportion.
And his opinion on what he calls the windmills he can see from his golf course.
He absolutely loathes them and launched into a huge, big, long diatribe about what a disaster wind power was, at the end of which Keir Starmer just turned to him and said, well, we believe in a mix of different types of power.
Hello and welcome to Talking Politics. We're recording this special edition as Donald Trump flies back to America after holding court. I think that's probably the right word, at his golf course up in Scotland with Sir Keir Starmer. Sir Keir Starmer only occasionally looking slightly awkward at the incredible contrasting styles of the pair. Carl was there, I'm very pleased to say, and joins me now to talk about all this. Carl, should we talk about style over substance first, just because I always find it startling when you see those two men together. You couldn't really imagine two more different politicians. What was it like in the room?
It's very, very striking, isn't it? I mean, Donald Trump was clearly incredibly relaxed today. In a funny way, although he's visiting the UK, he was actually the host because Keir Starmer was visiting his golf course at Turnberry. He laid on, a bagpiper to welcome the Starmers into the hotel, which was so noisy, half of us couldn't hear much of what he was saying at the beginning. And he talked actually almost emotionally, certainly reflectively, about his mother and her love of Scotland and how she used to come back here every year. So all of those things combine to make this a much stronger pairing between our slightly cautious left-wing prime minister and this totally mercurial right-wing US president. And they have this bond that, as you say, you just could never have anticipated. We saw how relaxed Trump was by how long he talked for. I mean, he talked for about 20 minutes on the steps and then another hour once we got inside.
Carl, just one more question on style then. We often talk about how, whether you like Donald Trump or you don't like Donald Trump, he is incredibly relaxed in this setting. He makes himself more available to the media than any politician any of us can ever remember. He's the opposite of Keir Starmer, who's pretty much all his media appearances, I think, are most politely described as wooden. I mean, do you think Keir Starmer looks at Donald Trump and thinks, well, I might not like his politics, I might not like a lot of what he says, but maybe this is something I could try a bit of? Or do you think he and his team are thinking, I could never pull that off, I wouldn't want to pull that off, I just don't want to do politics that way? What do you make of him looking at the leader of the free world and the way he chooses to interact with his supporters, his voters, and the media at large?
I think there is a difference, not just in personality, which clearly there is. Starmer is a much more cautious and careful individual, but I think also just in the roles that they have. I mean, Donald Trump as head of state, as the US president, wields incredible power and has been, I'm not going to say hoarding power, but in the way he uses executive orders, he's been showing how much power that he can accrue to the presidency, let's put it that way. Whereas our prime minister is still, to an extent, hemmed in by cabinet, by parliament, even with a big majority. We've seen, haven't we, in recent weeks that, that big majority doesn't necessarily do what the prime minister wants it to do. So I think both of those things mean that Keir Starmer, when you put them together, is always going to be a bit more cautious. Although I do think that when he is with Trump, he does somehow seem a little bit more relaxed, or at least he picks up on the vibe. He's very careful to jump in when he feels he needs to, when it strays onto UK domestic policy. But he does seem to do it in a way that is more relaxed when he's sitting beside Donald Trump.
Well, let's talk about the substance, because you asked about Russia. Maybe we could start actually by having your question, and then we can pick up with what you made of what Donald Trump said.
We can all sense your frustration with Vladimir Putin. Do you think he has been lying to you about his intentions in Ukraine?
Well, I don't want to use the word lying. All I know is we'd have a good talk, and it seemed on, let's say, 3 occasions, it seemed that we were going to have a ceasefire and maybe peace, and you divide it up and you do whatever you have to do, that obviously to get to the end. And all of a sudden, missiles are flying into Kiev and other places. And I say, what's that all about? I spoke to him 3-4 hours ago, and it looked like we were on our way. And then I'd say, forget it, and I'm not going to talk anymore. You know, this has happened on too many occasions, and I don't like it. I don't like it.
Well, let's talk about the substance of what he was saying today. How much do you think his position is or isn't shifting? I mean, he's shortened the deadline by which he says he wants the Russians to respond. How real, I mean, Trump's deadlines notoriously move around. What did you make of the deadline and of what may or may not happen after it if Russia doesn't do what he wants?
I think that was the key bit of American foreign policy that shifted today. Talking to people around Trump, I was very aware that he is fed up with Vladimir Putin and the way that he has been acting. And I had become aware that he was going to shorten that deadline by which he wants a ceasefire. That deadline was due to come into force on the 2nd of September. That was the end of the 50 days that Trump originally gave Putin, at which point he's talking about secondary tariffs, so tariffs on other countries that do business with Russia. We really weren't expecting him to lay his cards out quite so much, but that's the amazing thing about when you come up to any sort of event with Donald Trump, you'd never know what he's going to tell you. And all of a sudden he announced it's going to be 10 or 12 days. And I'm going to announce it formally in the next day or so. So 10 or 12 days from now, he's shortened that deadline by which he wants a ceasefire in Ukraine before he goes for secondary tariffs against President Putin. And that was why I asked him how fed up he was with President Putin and if he thought he had been lying to him. He didn't want to go that far, so the door is potentially still open. He did talk about how he has good phone calls with President Putin, but he clearly feels that Putin's acting in bad faith because the phone calls are followed by rocket attacks on Kyiv. So we watch that with interest. Of course, as you say, Tom, President Trump's deadlines, they kind of move around a lot, and especially where tariffs are concerned, those go up and down too, don't they?
I think it's fair to say, when you look at where we are in the Trump presidency, that he started off often having pretty nice things to say about foreign dictators like Vladimir Putin and pretty hostile things to say about his allies, European and so on. Trump, I don't think, has ever said anything particularly hostile about Britain or about Keir Starmer. Perhaps a few glancing comments in the early days. J.D. Vance was certainly perceived as saying things that were a bit disparaging of us, though he remains a noted Anglophile, we should point out. If you look at where we are now, here is Trump in the UK, in Scotland, being pretty frosty about Vladimir Putin, being very nice about Keir Starmer. He's done a trade deal with the UK. He's now done a trade deal with the EU, which is marginally less beneficial than the one for the UK. I mean, there is an argument, to be completely fair to Keir Starmer, that he's played it pretty well. At least I think his people, I'm sure, would say, well, look, you know, dealing with Donald Trump isn't easy. He's taken the long view. He's been quite charming. He's you know, played his hand well. The Europeans also have gradually come on board. They obviously don't like the tariffs, and there's a lot of kind of chat around Europe today that they don't really much like the deal they've been offered. I mean, what do you make really of how Keir Starmer's handled all this?
I think he's handled it incredibly well, actually. It would be so easy for a British Prime Minister, especially a left-leaning one, to go with the outrage against some of the things that Donald Trump has said, especially before he was back in the White House. And many Labour figures have done that. Not just Labour figures, I mean, American figures. J.D. Vance, was pretty disobliging about President Trump before he became vice president. But I think Keir Starmer has avoided that trap, but has also, seen where Trump's where advantage can be gained with Trump. I mean, that offer of the second state visit, I think, set the whole tone for the relationship that they've had ever since. Donald Trump is clearly, tickled pink by the idea of coming back for a second state visit. He thinks it's wonderful, spoke about it very warmly today. And I think other leaders have learned from the way that Keir Starmer has handled Trump. And he is, Donald Trump's talking more warmly about other European leaders. He was talking about Chancellor Merz today and how much he likes him. Even though he acknowledges the policy differences. And we did have we saw glimpses of that today. So particularly on wind power, Donald Trump hates, he calls them windmills, wind turbines, partly because you can see some here near his golf course, and you can see some out to sea from his other golf course. And he absolutely loathes them and launched into a huge, big, long diatribe about what a disaster wind power was for the UK and how wind turbines were terrible things, at the end of which Keir Starmer just turned to him and said, well, we believe in a mix of different types of power, including wind, including nuclear, and oil and gas is still there for a long time to come as well. So I think he's learned how to, to get Trump on side, but also how to gently disagree with him. And I think actually sitting that hour-long press conference, I think Keir Starmer might have disagreed with Donald Trump considerably more than the other way around. I think Trump was quite careful not to disagree with Starmer's policies that he was invited to disagree with. But Keir Starmer still found a way of jumping in whenever Trump said something that he didn't like, albeit he did it very gently.
The other big issue that world leaders everywhere are very exercised with, quite understandably, of course, is Gaza. Keir Starmer under pressure, certainly from some of his own MPs, to recognise Palestine as a state. Obviously, the starvation and hunger in Gaza is horrific for the world to see. There were questions about it. Donald Trump clearly gives the impression that he thinks something needs to be done about it, but isn't really going as far as many people would like in terms of putting pressure on Israel. What did you make of that exchange?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I asked Donald Trump, did he think that Israel was doing all that they could do to protect civilians? And his answer to that, as to many of the questions on this, was, well, everyone's doing bad things. The whole place is a mess. He did sort of go a bit further later on about how he wants to see the food get through to the Palestinians. He isn't blaming Israel for the state of food supply in Gaza as much as European nations and the UK, who are solidly laying the blame at the door of Israel. But he tended to pivot, this is President Trump, he tended to pivot every time this was brought up to, as he does, to the deal and to the peace deal. And his view is that the hostages have to be released, but that Hamas, now that they're down to, he said 10 or 20 hostages, he said he doesn't think they will release those 10 or 20 hostages because they're the last remaining shield that they've got. So he thinks that they will bargain very, very hard for those last hostages and won't want to give them up. And he kept saying that he therefore thought that Israel would have to do something else. And I'll almost put that in air quotes, something else. What that something else was, he didn't go as far as to say, but it didn't sound like it. I didn't get the impression that he was talking about more negotiation. I thought he was talking about a possibly a more military solution. But what that could be, I don't know. But I think so. I got the impression that he was still willing to support Israel in that, whilst also wanting to say that the aid should get through to the Palestinians. So he steers more of a middle course between the Israeli argument, the Israeli side and the Palestinian side, than I think many European nations are currently doing, having seen what is going on in Gaza as regards the civilian population.
We know Trump can be very rude to leaders he's hosting when he wants to be. Think about that awful meeting with Zelensky in the Oval Office. As you say, he was extremely polite, it seemed to me, to Keir Starmer today, going out of his way not really to disagree with him, not to pick an argument about anything really, not to have a public fight. There were, nevertheless, some gloriously awkward moments. He and J.D. Vance really seem to hate Sadiq Khan for reasons it's a little hard to get your head around. I mean, there was the windmill stuff, as you said, but what did you make of Trump really having a go at Sadiq Khan, somebody, as far as I'm aware, he hasn't even ever met?
Yeah, I mean, that beef has been going on for so long that it's quite hard to remember quite how it started. But Sadiq Khan has always been willing to hit back against Trump. And I think that hasn't helped. Donald Trump invited to talk about whether London still had no-go areas. Remember, once upon a time, he said London had no-go areas. Was very happy to lay into the London mayor and talk about what an awful man, what an awful job he was doing. At which point the Prime Minister did say, by the way, he's a friend of mine, which I thought, that was a moment where fraught with danger for Keir Starmer, frankly. He would have looked awful if he hadn't said anything. It wasn't the staunchest defence, it was a careful defence, but he did weigh in on behalf of his fellow Labour politician at that moment. The other thing that I thought was slightly awkward in a different way was actually when they arrived. Lady Victoria Starmer is here as well. They've just come from the Euros. And as they were standing on the steps outside the hotel, Donald Trump waxed lyrical about how well respected Victoria Starmer is in the United States. And he kept saying, I respect her, everyone respects her. And then he said, I better keep quiet now or I'm going to get myself into trouble. And you just wondered, what were you thinking that might have got you into trouble if you'd said it? But fortunately, he didn't.
Grateful for small mercies. Finally, we should probably deal with an issue that he hasn't been able to shake off at home, and it didn't seem he was able to shake off here today either, which is the horrifying business of the Epstein scandal and the many young girls that Epstein and potentially others abused. He has sometimes sought to avoid the question. He's tried every distraction technique going, and it doesn't seem to be working. The questions keep coming. Many in his own base, as we know, are very unhappy about it. He is really not doing his usual good job of getting away from an issue by deflecting onto other issues, is he? And he seemed to be advancing the latest sort of cornerstone of his argument, which is, well, I never went to Epstein's island, which doesn't seem to most people to be saying an awful lot. Again, you sat there in the room throughout this exchange. What did you make of it?
I was very surprised at how much he was willing to engage with those questions. One of the things that our US colleagues were telling us before we went into the room is that if Trump starts to not like questions that he's getting, then he just closes down the press conference and that's it. Everybody goes out. This time he didn't do that. He answered a lot of questions about Epstein. He talked about the drawing, which is a matter of legal dispute now with the Wall Street Journal. He talked about the island, as you said. He made quite a number of allegations about other people that I'm not going to repeat because I can't tell you how true or not they are, and they're not here they're not able to defend themselves against that. He also talked about the files, the so-called Epstein files, and said that if they had anything that was incriminating, then the Biden administration would surely have released it to harm him. So that may be a line we hear a bit more of. But yeah, he went for it on his defense today and certainly addressed a lot of the issues that are there. but we haven't heard the end of it, have we? There's a lot more to come. He was also asked, actually, was he willing to give Ghislaine Maxwell a pardon? And he said he hadn't been asked to give her a pardon, but he didn't by any means deny that he would.
Well, that would be a startling development, to say the very, very least. But that's probably the subject of a whole much longer discussion, which I'm sure we will have at some point very soon. Carl, thank you very much indeed for joining us. That's it for now. If you haven't already, please do subscribe on YouTube or any podcast platform to make sure you never miss an episode. Thank you very much for joining us.